Can everybody still hear me okay in the back? Justin, can you hear me okay? All right, good. All right, I guess without further ado, we'll get started. My name is Jeff Gladnick. I'm the founder of Great Dental Websites, a company that we started as kind of a software platform for making local small business websites. Think about Squarespace if Squarespace was just made to make local small business sites and rank them. And then eventually we added an agency on top of it and built the company over 8 years. And today I'm going to talk to you about my experiences bootstrapping a company from nothing to $1 million a year in revenue and beyond. We should have plenty of time for questions at the end. This should run a little under an hour. But the first thing I want to do is ask you guys a question, which is, do you really want to do this? Because there's a lot of pitfalls that come with this. And you need to think about ahead what you're getting into and really appreciate the journey you're about to go on. There are a lot of risks. You could burn up all of your savings. You could waste the prime of your life. I see a lot of people here younger than me in their 20s, and I was there once too. Are you willing to kind of look back at 30 and say, man, I just worked on something for the last 4 or 5 years and it's over and I don't have much to show for it and I'm out of money? Because that could have happened to me. It almost did. And of course, some of you may already have well-paid full-time jobs. Are you really ready to give that up? But there are rewards. You could achieve financial independence. You could have complete freedom of your time. The company is at a stage now where I really don't have anything to do anymore. Every time I come into work, there's a couple things waiting for me, but I don't have a job to do. I gave away the last bit of those responsibilities in November when we hired a full-time sales guy who's done great. But you can have that too if you go down this route. And of course, you can be your own boss, which is both a reward and a risk. I can tell you. So there's an overall philosophy I've had kind of throughout my career in business, and I've kind of summed it up into these 3 points. The first one, pay it forward. I've always tried to do favors for people or help people if I could without expecting anything in return. You could call that karma. I'd be accurate too. But oftentimes people will remember this and do a favor for you down the road. Or if you believe in karma, somebody else will help you randomly. You need to learn to take punches and take the high road, almost always. This applies to dealing with negative or sometimes very rude feedback from customers, feedback from your staff, which is not always presented in the most diplomatic way. But you need to learn to accept that, or from competitors. You don't want to get into battles with competitors and take the low road. I'll talk about that in a minute. And lastly, you really need to understand what your personal weaknesses and failings are and build systems and processes around it. And just a quick example for me, I am terrible at organizing anything. You can ask my wife, who's here. I can't remember names, birthdays, where we're going on Saturday. I can't remember anything. And that's a huge problem if you're running a business. And one of the first hires I made was an executive assistant that kind of filled in all those problems for me and helped me remember everything. There are other things I did too, but you need to really figure out where your Achilles heel is and build systems around it. So is bootstrapping for you? Why not raise money? There's a lot of good reasons for this, but the main question I think comes down to how much money and time and effort is it going to take you to actually build a company that makes money or breaks even? So if you have dreams to build the next Tesla or something, you're going to need a factory, all this capital equipment and investment, tons of engineers. There's no way you can bootstrap that. But if you're going into a services business or a hybrid services business like we did, and you can build the minimum viable product yourself or with your partner or get it done cheaply, bootstrapping may be a perfect fit for you. So why did I choose to bootstrap? A couple reasons. I had a background in software engineering, so I was able to build the minimum viable product, our software platform, myself. I was the guy on the bus coming home in San Francisco and going to and from work in the East Bay for an hour each way coding because I could get 2 hours in and then another hour in at night. I did this for 3 or 4 years. I was also rejected by every initial investor I talked to. Initially, nobody had any interest in investing in the company. And furthermore, I wanted to retain control of the company. I had a couple friends who were backed, who were venture backed. Some of them by really impressive firms like Vinod Khosla or Bill Gates' outfit. But looking at what happened to them, like although it was very prestigious and they had a lot of money and things were going well and they had nice offices, they were slaves to their board and their investor. That could happen to you. Another thing about just a quick thought on exits, like you can get into a situation with investors or venture capitalists where, and there's nothing wrong with this route, but you may be forced to take a deal where the venture capital company is kind of guaranteed a return. So you may raise $5 million, sell the company for 20, and walk out with nothing because the VC company had terms in dictating what they would exit with. Or you may just get a little bit. And you may have been better off if you just bootstrapped and stayed a little smaller and retained control and did what you wanted to do. Things I didn't know at the time, but I've learned now. If you're bootstrapping, it'll keep you scrappy and disciplined, especially with money. I saw a lot of companies raise money and then immediately throw a big party with a DJ, an open bar, and spend thousands of dollars. And I always thought, man, I'm really glad I was invited to this party. And I'm also really glad I'm not paying for it. Because they looked really expensive. And we were trying to kind of scrimp along, stay cash flow positive, stay profitable the whole time. And it's hard to throw out $10,000 parties when you're doing that. And you do have, if you want to raise money later, it's not like it's not an either-or situation. You don't have to bootstrap forever. You can always raise money later. But if you're already profitable, you already have revenue coming in, everything's growing, you'll be in a much better position to dictate the terms of your investment. So a couple things we'll cover, kind of my personal history through entrepreneurship rather quickly and the lessons I learned, the history of this company. You guys can see the rest here. We'll just kind of go through this and try to get through it as quickly as we can in an hour. So how did I get down this road and how this happened to me? I have a degree in electrical and computer engineering, and running more or less a marketing agency for dentists is not on the brochure where they promise you what kind of career you're going to have. So how did I get here? I had a couple attempts at early entrepreneurship that I'll go through right now. And this is kind of the way on the left is a great chart from Dimitri Martin. This is the way everybody kind of is presented by the media, what success looks like. You build Facebook and then you're out in California, you have billions of dollars and you have a movie. It's not that easy. Even to achieve like 0.1% or probably way less of that success. The first business I ever tried to start was more or less Netflix for Nintendo games when I was 7 years old. And I convinced every kid in the neighborhood to let me control and kind of house their Nintendo games. And they would get a credit at my store, and they could borrow Nintendo games. And this worked awesome. I was making several dollars a week. And unfortunately, this blew up in my face when I had, it did not work out, as you may have expected. And what did I learn? So I had one sheet of loose leaf paper that told me who had what video game, and I lost it. And this led to a community meeting with parents yelling at other parents, and mostly yelling at my parents. And their kids willingly gave me those games. And there was a huge argument about who had Bionic Commando. I still think Kyra Sabo has it to this day, and he's holding it out. Not everybody got all of their games back. You can't trust 7-year-olds. And so there are some lessons learned here. You got to keep good records. I've become fastidious about backups. Our software is backed up 3 or 4 times a day in 2 to 3 different locations, depending on the data. The database is backed up. The static content is backed up multiple times in different locations. The whole freaking server is backed up at the data center. Because I've learned this a couple times in my career, you just cannot afford to lose data. If you guys are not backing up your data, oh my God, it's gonna burn you eventually. Also, if you have to shut down, try to shut down gracefully instead of, hey, all the Nintendo games are gone. The second attempt, there are a couple more not worth mentioning in between, but when I was in college and I was a freshman, I returned my books. The bookstore was like, oh, you paid $1,000? Here's $20. Get lost. And I was very angry. And I decided I would make some kind of classified form for students to trade in their books. Didn't work out. So that was right around the time the dot-com bubble was bursting. We actually got investment inquiries from probably fools who wanted to invest in this, but the dot-com bubble exploded. We had no business model. There was no way college students were going to pay to list their books on a classified ad thing. And so what I kind of learned here, timing is a bit of a factor. You don't want to be raising money during a financial collapse, because there will be another one. And you can't just build it and they will come. You need to have somebody thinking about business marketing partnerships and growing the business. You can't just have two programmers make something cool and then expect it to just work on its own. I got hired by two doctors in California to try to make the Napster of medical photography. The problem was it was completely uninsurable. We had all this medical photography of patients, but the releases were not all there. And the only people that were willing to insure it was Lloyd's of London, which insures all these wacky ideas, and they wanted a lot of money. We almost exited to a pharmaceutical company, but it didn't work out, so that was another failure. What I learned about that, you have to have good legal due diligence. It's boring and it's lame, but it's worth it. Get somebody who's an attorney to do you a favor. Get those documents done at the beginning. Have good agreements between partners. Those are good lessons to take away from there. And what's this? Oh yeah, and so the three part-time founders, I worked on this part-time while I was in school. The two doctors were doctors. You need somebody who's all in, at least one, probably everybody. So this was the next serious company I tried to do, and this one I still think was a good idea. So we made this aftermarket attachment for snowboarders. Who's a snowboarder here? How many of you guys are uncomfortable on these chairlifts? Yeah, I should have stuck with it. But this is kind of an early prototype. There's me with hair and in better shape on the right. There's one of my partners kind of holding the product and demonstrating it. There's my other partner holding one up, the other prototypes. This is the best shot I could find of a screen grab at the X Games where we debuted it. And this was more or less what the final product looked like that we sold to ski resorts. But again, we had one part-time fail. We had another failure here. So if you didn't guess where this was going, we had one guy that was part-time. He had a real job. That led to resentment. Everybody, I think, needs to be all in if you have multiple founders. And maybe you shouldn't have all three founders from the same background. We were all engineers. Nobody had a business background. Nobody knew how to do marketing. Nobody knew how to do sales. I tried to figure it out. But you need a diversified team. Also, spending too much on legal fees is a bad idea. We had great intellectual property coverage in like 80% of the places on Earth that people skied. But we wasted way too much money on that. We didn't have enough left over for marketing or anything else. We burned it up. And really, somebody in your organization, especially I think a founder, needs to become the master of sales. I think the early sales really need to be done by the founder, and that was something I took with me. So before I get to Great Done Websites, the last one, I did custom software consulting when I was in San Francisco. And I worked on some cool projects. I helped build the Adobe Marketplace. I was one of the lead engineers there. I made kind of a dig at the time, or now a Reddit clone for a private NGO. And that was a great project because it taught me how to build multi-tenant software, or how to make the platform that we use today. If you can get consulting gigs, and I'll talk about this in a bit, that help augment what you're trying to do, that's a great way to bootstrap your company, where you can get paid to learn and paid to build parts of your company. And it doesn't have to be software. And this one was a tie. I got hired by one of my the companies I was contracting for, so we'll call that a tie. But you definitely want to work on those types of projects that further your goals if you're doing consulting on the side. Be choosy about what you pick. The other thing is, make sure you actually know how to collect money from customers. This seems like an easy thing, but there's a lot of people who will not pay you. There's still a guy in Florida that owes me $3,000, and I'm never going to get that money. And at the time, that was a big hit to me because I worked for a couple of weeks on his stuff, and I had put all my things on hold. So make sure you get payment up front, or you have some kind of terms or payment. You're dealing with reputable people. It's not worth taking a risk to just do a little bit more for me for free. I'll pay you next week. Don't trust those people. So Great Done Websites, the company you guys probably want to know more about versus the Nintendo business. This started out as a favor for my dad. There are 7 dentists in my family. My dad is a dentist. And growing up around dentists my whole life, when I was like a little kid, the jobs that I thought were available to me were like firefighter, policeman, dentist. There's everybody around me. And I made a crappy website for my dad when I was in school. And he called me up. I was working at startups. He wanted a new website. I didn't have any time. Told him to get some bids from the companies that had been pestering him constantly to make a website and do their marketing for him, and I'd help him pick a good one. And there were no good ones. He got, I think the best quote he got was 25 or 35 grand for a website for a dentist. And that was just the setup fees. That wasn't even getting into the recurring marketing fees, the hosting, support, anything else. That was just what they wanted to turn the lights on. And so I decided I would just build him something. and just make the time. And my uncles heard about this, the free website deal, and they wanted in. And it's hard to say no to family, especially the one uncle who lent me 10 grand for the snow rhino project that he never got back. So he was getting a free website. And while I was about halfway through, they started to refer a couple of their friends and colleagues. So I started to think, wow, this may be more than just a favor. Maybe I have a business. Eventually, that led to real customers and I'll talk about how we acquired them. And we started to get traction and recurring leads. And eventually, I was sitting in an engineering meeting one day at my job at Dun & Bradstreet, and my phone rang 4 times during an hour-long meeting. And it was people calling the sales number. And I was like, wow, there's a lot of people that want a dental website. And I thought at that point, maybe it's time to quit my job. And I went home, talked to my wife. She told me she was pregnant. So I did what anybody would do. Told my boss I was quitting and moving to Colorado. And I did take some consulting for a few months to kind of carry the load. And I'll talk about kind of what my funding was. It wasn't that ad hoc, but sometimes it feels like that. So let's talk about planning first. This is the only great quote from Mike Tyson. All of his other ones are horrible. But this is sheer brilliance. You could have told me Albert Einstein said it and I would have believed you. So how are you going to go about planning your exit or planning to start your company? And you really need to think about how much money you need to save or get in order to launch, and whether or not your business will make money right away. If you're building some kind of app or product that's going to take 6 months, 9 months, 12 months to build, you need Runway for that, and you probably need to double it. You may need alternative sources of revenue, and one thing you can do with that is consulting. I mentioned that before. I worked on a couple projects that allowed me to build part of the infrastructure we used for our software platform. So I literally, and they knew I was doing it. I told them I was, but you should be honest with your customers. But we were able to reuse a lot of the code to build what we built, and they were able to get the project at a bit of a discount. I also used savings. I had like 100K in the bank when I started, and the low point was when it hit 20, but then it came back up. So make sure you have enough saved, enough runway. There's also some great grants you can get. The Snow Runner project I did was initially funded by a grant from the NCIA. Is anybody here in college? Well, for the 2 of you, or 3 of you, there's an organization called the NCIA, or NCIA, something like that, just Google it. But they gave us like 11 grand to start the Snow Runner project for free, no strings attached. And I think we could have gotten a little more if we had asked for it. I think we could have gotten like 20. Maybe they've increased that a bit. There's an organization called Startup Chile that I referred a friend to who won. They denied me. I was very jealous. But he got 40 grand to move to Chile for, I think, like 3 or 6 months or something. Paid like the travel expenses too. And he and his co-founder just went to Chile, did some great networking, met some cool people, and got 40 grand to work on their business for 6 months. The state government, I know the Office of Economic Development here has various grants. And you could do a Kickstarter, which I know nothing about, so I won't talk about it, but it apparently has worked for people. For me, the decision to quit was when the company's revenue was about 50% of my salary. So at that time, the company was very lean. It was me, my Belarusian intern, Alex, and my wife, who did some copywriting. And that was it. But the revenue for all of that was more or less half of what I was making, and I had a bit of a nest egg saved up. So I figured I had at least a year, maybe a year and a half, maybe 2 if we really stretched of runway to make this work. And just to make sure, I did consulting on the side for about 6 months before I finally gave that up too. Another thing you can do, because I know some people who are starting service organizations or have, you may be ready to quit as soon as you get that key initial customer acquisition. So if you have a whale customer that you have a great relationship with that you can take with you to your new company, you may be able to quit immediately and work on that client and then build the business. I know some people have done that. And for me, I formed the company while I was still fully employed. I worked nights, weekends, mornings on my commute. I was the guy on the bus coding. And that's another way you can do it, to kind of keep stability and safety in your life at the expense of some social engagements. So originally my rough plan was to build a software platform for making do-it-yourself, locally optimized small business sites. Like I said, Squarespace for just straight-up local websites, brick-and-mortar sites. The software would be so amazing that it would sell itself. I was sure of that. It was absolutely wrong. We would use Dennis as our beta group because I had so many of them in my family and I was already working with them. And then we'd expand to every conceivable group, and then we'd cash out immediately and sell for a 10 or 20x multiple. So that didn't happen. But the revised plan was we would still make this great platform, but we realized that most of the customers that could afford our services and wanted our services didn't actually want to make their websites. It turns out dentists are rather busy. They charge quite a bit per hour, and they have no idea how to make a website. They wanted somebody else to do it for them, and they wanted to have as little involvement as possible. So we ended up building an agency on top of the software platform to facilitate that. So all the copywriting, graphic design. And the takeaway here is, everybody talks about pivoting, and it may not be a pivot, but it may be a slight deviation in your plan. Your original plan may still be solid. And one of the things I'm really glad we did was stick to the idea of sticking on that, of forcing people onto our platform. It turned out to have a lot of benefits for both parties. But you may need to make some adjustments. And that was one major adjustment. It took me a year or two to admit. If I had admitted that sooner, it would probably be a year ahead. So be prepared for some kind of deviation in your plan and be ready to embrace it. We still are using Dennis as the beta group. And we now are trying to carefully expand to very select groups and only under the right circumstances. This can be a tremendous waste of time and resources, as I will share with you, as I found out. And I don't really have an exit plan. We've gotten we get 3 or 4 offers for buyouts every year. There's never really enough money, I'm sure. At some point, maybe somebody will do it. But I don't really feel the need to exit. And that's another great position of being a bootstrap company. You don't have to exit. There's no pressure from investors to sell because you're getting a return. The company's profitable. We make money. We keep growing. We keep adding more heads, more customers. And everything's going great. Why sell? What else would I do at this point? I can't go back to my old job. So one of the biggest mistakes I made, and I hope you guys all avoid this, was not networking enough and not finding mentors early on in my career. I've corrected that now in the last year or so. But for a long time, I was convinced there's nobody in Denver, San Francisco, that's trying to make a dental marketing product. Turns out there are in both cities, and I should have tried a little bit harder to find them. And even if you can't find anybody who's doing exactly what you're doing, you can find people who are doing similar things or doing completely different businesses that have solved the same problems as you. You need to start talking to diverse groups of people, to other founders. There's a lot of you here in this room. You probably just talk to the person next to you if you haven't already. They may have some ideas that will help you. You need to get involved in these kinds of groups and think about what your weak points are and who can help you. That's a great role for mentors that may turn into advisory boards or investors later. So how do you find your customers? I'm a big believer in picking a niche. And you have to figure out what the niche really wants. And I talked about that process a little bit, how dentists didn't really want the website. They wanted the whole website built for them. They didn't want the platform. And it took a couple years before we really understood what our niche wanted, what dentists wanted, and how to market for dentists. Our clients can call us up today and ask us very specific questions about how a before and after gallery picture for an implant is composed on their page, and we can answer that. That's not a service they can get from most local web shops because we very much understand our customers. On the flip side, that makes it difficult to expand into other services. We failed twice to expand to mental health therapists. The first time we had what we thought was a really solid partnership that fell apart, and with it, the customers that we were getting through that channel left. The second time, we had hired a really awesome individual who had worked for a competitor, and we're like, this is great. She knows everything. She can just rerun the same business plan before, and she decided to go work for another company. And that's fine. Everybody needs to kind of pick their own path, but it's difficult to expand out of your core business because you need, in my opinion, to do a business like we're doing, some very specific knowledge about how that business works to do it. So it's not necessarily a bad idea to stick to your niche for quite a while before you're ready to expand, and I've kind of learned that the hard way twice. How do you get, but your very first group of customers are what I would call the beta customers, and for me, these are my uncles, my dad, and their buddies that they had referred. And a couple people that we had like a contest for where we gave free web services away forever. We still have those 2 guys as clients. Not unsurprisingly, it's free. It's a good deal. But you need to acquire beta customers at any cost. And I've heard people, especially like art students or people who went to like creative design schools, get advice that you need to charge guild prices, you need to charge market rates, your service is worth that. I would completely disagree with that. You need to acquire your first customers at any price possible, even if you're doing it for free. You need to find the right customer to do it for free. You don't want to do it for somebody that's going to be out of business. You want to do it for somebody that will be out of business and who can refer you other customers and who can give you good feedback and who can give you testimonials. You're not really doing this for free. You're trading. You're trading credibility for your services. And that is exactly what we did. The first couple of sites we did absolutely for free. Then we did a couple at steep discounts, and we gradually raised our prices over time to where they should be. But don't feel like, I think it's going to be very difficult, especially if you're in some kind of services businesses or a business where you rely on testimonials and reviews, which is most businesses, to convince people to use your service when no one else has and pay full price for it. That will come later. One thing you need to be cognizant of, you're going to get a lot of feedback from your early customers. Some of it is going to be, your product sucks. This feature's terrible. I hate this. You need to thank them for that. And this is where the thick skin comes in. Always be very gracious and accept that kind of feedback with humility. And think about it for a day or two. You may discover they were right. We've looked at a lot of things that we've done, policies, processes, features, and we've made changes. We've made a lot of changes based on the feedback that we've got from our customers. And you have to have open ears and a small ego and thick skin in order to get that. Even competitors grilling you use that information. They're telling you what your weaknesses are. And they're not always wrong. You need to take that on the chin and plow on and figure out how to correct it. Another little trick that I do from time to time is I'll call my customers randomly with absolutely no agenda and just say, hey, how you doing? How's your website working out? Can we do anything else to help you? And sometimes they're unhappy. And they tell you, actually, it didn't work out very good because of this. And sometimes it's a really small thing that you can flick a switch for, and they're instantly very happy. They give you a great review, and they completely turn around. But they won't always tell you unless you ask. Just call your customers randomly or email them or reach out and just ask them for feedback. You may be surprised what they hear, especially with the beta customers. Those guys, you need to talk to all of them and get a lot of feedback, and they owe that to you. You also need to learn when to say no. You can't build everything your customers want, and we have a lot of burnout development hours and a lot of wasted time on wasted projects to prove it. If you say yes to everybody, I think the quote goes, you'll disappoint everyone. And you'll also build terrible ideas. But this is a bit of an art form. You need to learn how to kind of gauge what ideas customers come to you with that really fit into your long-term goal. And you need to build those. It's really tough to say, and you just have to spend some time thinking about it and bouncing ideas off other customers, off your staff, off other people, your mentors, your network, if you're struggling, especially with big features or big projects on what to build. But you have to kind of walk that line. So when do you get real customers? Your first batch of real customers, in my opinion, should come organically from referrals. You have happy people using your product. You should be able to ask them to refer you to their friends and colleagues. And for us, we acquired most of our customers through a large dental online forum. So a lot of the referrals happened online, but some of them happened in real life. The first beta customers referred us to my dad and his uncles referred us to their friends, who referred us to their friends. And then we went online and things started to snowball. Try not to compete on price when you're ready to actually raise your prices. You don't want to be the low-cost provider. You'll always be kind of hamstrung with that. Try to compete on value, figure out where you stand, where you feel like you can create the best contribution, and you can adjust your prices over time. It's tough to raise the price on the same thing a lot over time, but you can add additional value-added services that people will pay you more for over time, which is what we did. So how do we get our first real customers? If you're asleep right now, this is the most important slide in this entire presentation. And it's the key to how I built this entire company. We marketed to online communities, and I found a huge online community that I wanted to buy advertising from. It had like 100,000 dentists. And I approached them, and they wanted a lot of money for the advertising, and I did not have any of it. And I got some great advice from their sales rep. He said, all right, you don't have any money, great, I can't help you, but why don't you just go into the forum and be useful? And that was brilliant advice. If you can find a forum or an online community, and this could be on Facebook, it could be a LinkedIn group, it could be a private forum somewhere, it could be meetup groups, where your niche hangs out, you need to show up there and you need to be useful. And there's a couple rules that you need to keep in mind, because I've watched so many companies screw this up royally, and it immediately blow up in their face or blow up in their face over the course of a couple weeks, and then they disappear from that community, never to be seen again. And there's so many fly-by-nights that do this. I've developed these rules that I constantly tell my staff. So you should not think of this as marketing. You should think of this as a public service volunteer job that you have taken on to help this community. You are going to be a resource for this community. You're going to answer any questions you can intelligently answer that you see. You need to monitor this community as much as you can. Still check it to this day. Every day I've posted 2,000 posts in there. You need to be present. You need to be useful. You never, ever, ever sell your product. Do not ever try to sell your product. I see, and this is the most common mistake I see. New business comes in, tries to do the same thing we did, immediately starts selling their product. And the moderators, if they don't delete it immediately, the community just starts lambasting them and get out of here. What are you doing? It never goes over well. Just show up and be useful. Usually, message forums or communities will allow you to put some kind of signature in your underneath your posts. That's a perfect online community to target. Then you can put your ad there. You can explain what you do and how to contact you, and people will. It will take time. For us, it probably took, the first time I posted in that community, I was accused of being a scam artist, and we were there to rip off dentists. And that's kind of a fair assessment, not of me, but of these types of companies, because there are a lot of companies that look at dentists as giant bags of money. And that wasn't my case. I thought of them as my dad, or my Uncle Joe, who I still owe 10 grand to. So, but at least with dentists, there's a high, and on our type of business, there's a high rate of shysters out there. And there's a bunch of companies that do what we do that I would put in the category of criminals that really should be at least taken to the civil court. So don't sell anything. You're going to trip alarms. You just want to show up, be useful, but let people know who you are and what you do. But never sell. And manners matter. Do not get into flame wars with competitors. Do not get into arguments with important people in the forum. There are important people in online communities. And you can usually figure that out by the number of posts they had and the deference paid to them by other participants of the community. You want to engage these people, get their feedback, and win their support, which is what we attempted and did do. You don't want to argue with them and get into huge debates. Certainly not at the beginning. Maybe later you can get into friendly debates when you have a rapport. And you have to be patient. It takes time. Do not expect this to produce leads for you in weeks or months. You need to have a year-long plan to do this. And we've done this for probably 6 or 7 years now. So partnerships can be a great source of leads and new business as well. We had a fantastic partnership with a company called Lighthouse 360 that unfortunately went away when they got acquired by Yodel. But for a long time, they provided those little text message reminders to dentists, and they had no interest in doing marketing or websites for them. And we were a reliable company that would do well for their customers, and we passed many leads back and forth. And it was a great business relationship for several years. If you can find a company that works with your niche and doesn't do what you do, you need to approach them about a partnership. This may mean you need to pay them. This may mean you need to just have a friendly relationship and pass leads back and forth and do little cross-marketing things. The way we always approach partnerships is we see if we have any customers in common that can vouch for the other company. If they don't, we usually do something soft like an initial cross-marketing email blast or something to each other's lists, and it'll come with a caveat. We like what this company does. We haven't worked with them, but they're saying the right things. We've talked to their management. We like them. We recommend you try it. And usually they'll give us some kind of deal if it's like that. And then we'll get feedback from our membership or our clients, and then do an update later that this company's vetted. We like them now. We've had many failures with partnerships as well. And they're never really failures. They're just usually wasted time and distractions. I'd encourage you to keep plugging on. Just don't get too invested and try to ascertain really early on what a good partnership is. A good partnership probably has more customers than you. A good partnership is probably more established than you. However, on the other side, you're a bad partnership to them. So you may have to do a little convincing, but try to find companies that are more successful than you that work in your niche and make them love you and convince them that you're great and you can help them. So thoughts on launching your product. You want to launch your beta group as early as possible because you need to get their feedback. If you build things in a vacuum, you will build them incorrectly. I can certainly attest to that. There's nothing more humbling than watching someone, especially if anybody here who builds software has ever done UI testing, where you just sit somebody down and tell them to accomplish a task inside your product, and they can't do it. And you're like, what's wrong with you? Just click the button. And they won't do it. And you're like, it's right under that menu item list. And you got to fight the urge to say something, and they're just like screwing around, like scrolling all over the place. You can't find it anywhere. And they leave, and you're like, a person is an idiot. And then 5 more people come in and do the same thing, and you're like, I'm an idiot. And you need to be ready for that, because it will happen, and you need to be able to, but you need that testing early on. You need to test the people, even if you're just grabbing your friends or neighbors and saying, try to accomplish some kind of task in my application, or even just feedback on your process or business model. Bounce your ideas off everybody. A lot of people have this notion, and I was one of them, that you have this brilliant idea and it's a big secret. If you tell anybody, they're going to immediately rip it off. No, they're not. They have other things to do. And it's really hard to rip off an idea and build a company. But it's really easy for somebody to give you feedback. So share your idea. Unless you've discovered like cold fusion energy or something, like it's probably not an idea that's going to get ripped off. Somebody probably is already working on your idea. There's probably several teams working on your idea. When I started this company, there were a handful of dental marketing companies. There's at least like several hundred now. It's nothing really unique or original. And a lot of it comes down to execution and the ethics and core principles that guide the company. But money really is the true vote of confidence. And as early as possible, try to get your beta users to pay you. This is kind of the first test for whether or not you have an idea or you need to come to Jesus meeting to really think about what you're doing. Because and it really doesn't matter what your product is. If you can't even get your customers to give you $1 recurring on their credit card per month, you need to really reevaluate what your plans are and what you're trying to offer. Because that is a trivial amount of money. If you ask for $1 and someone's like, yeah, no, that's not going to work. And obviously, if you're selling products that are several $1,000s, maybe you're not selling it for $1. But if you can't get it done for half price or a quarter price, you have problems and you need to figure it out. I commonly see this sort of failure to launch situation take effect with people where they're working on their startup, and that's kind of the mental self-image that they've bought into, where I'm working on a startup, but you can never fail until you launch it, and they never launch, and it's never good enough. Launch when it's good enough, and your customers, and if people are starting to pay you money, it's probably good enough. This, again, is a bit of an art, and really only you can make this call. But usually it's better to launch early with something that can be updated later, especially if you're doing software. Doing hardware, maybe not. I did a hardware company too, but that was a long time ago, and it didn't work. Should probably talk to somebody else about that. But launch when it's good enough. You can always update it. So let's talk about hiring. Eventually, you're going to come to a point where you can't do everything, and there are some things that you realize you don't do well at all, and you have no business doing. For me, eventually, this became everything. But this is roughly the framework I use to figure out whether or not it's time to hire a full-time employee. So the first thing, is this role or responsibility expanding, and is it recurring? Do we have an ongoing need for this that's only going to get better? Are we going to have more than one person doing this in a few months? Well, we should probably hire a full-time employee right away. If not, is there some kind of free tool that can do this? If not, we'll buy it for nothing. Is there a paid tool? If there is, and it's cost-effective, we'll buy it. If not still, is there another company that can perform this service for us? Frequently, there are companies that for a couple $100 a month, and that seems expensive for software, but it's a lot cheaper than hiring a full-time employee, and it's a lot less risky. It's so easy to fire a company. You just press cancel sometimes, and that's it. Sometimes it takes a phone call. That's it. It's gut-wrenching to let people go. And it's one of the worst parts of being an entrepreneur running a business is having to let people go. It always is just a terrible conversation. You feel awful. It's never a pleasant experience. And then lastly, maybe you don't have the need for a full-time employee. Can a part-time person do this? Is it really something that's going to take 40 hours a week? Most of our initial employees, or staff I should say, were part-time contractors that work 10 or sometimes 20 hours a month just on projects. You may not need to hire a full-time person. You probably can't afford it at the beginning either. And if the answer still is no, then you're forced to hire a full-time employee. In the beginning, we really used part-time contractors, and I used Craigslist mostly to find people. I know Some people have used Odesk and offshore stuff. I've had mixed experiences with that to find people to work for you. But there's nothing wrong with using part-time people. And some of these people will become full-time people. I used to hire like students who, especially for programming interns, and I kind of had to deal with them like, I'll teach you to do software engineering and programming, and you can get a job like my real job and help me work on my business, and I paid them a little bit, and they would learn while they're in school. And that worked out really well for Alex. He has a full-time job at a startup that pays him over 6 figures now in San Francisco. You want to gradually expand the hours and the scope of the work with your needs, and that's why part-time people are perfect for that, especially when you're scrappy and you don't have any money. You want to really personally supervise the work as you start to give parts of your job away. As you give away, in my case, the copywriting, or the programming, or the design, or the project management, you really need to keep tabs on that until you're comfortable with that person. You cannot afford to make mistakes early on. When you only have 4 or 5 customers and you have a project that fails, that's way too high up a percentage of failed projects. You need every single customer you have to give you those referrals so you can grow as quickly as possible. You cannot afford failure. Keep an eye on quality. Monitor everything like a hawk for the first bit. Then you need to learn to let go, which I'll get to in a second. Eventually, you will be able to promote some people to full-time employees. Some people may not want to. We still have contractors working for us part-time that are remote, that are perfectly happy doing what they've done for many years. You can also trade services with other people. How many people are in an incubator like Galvanize or something like that? Anybody? So we were in Galvanize for a year, and it was a great experience. And we also met a lot of other, or at least I met a lot of other founders. And I was able to trade at one point. I taught another founder who runs an online furniture or interior design shop how to hire programmers and how to interview software engineers, because she had never done it before. And she taught me how to make financial projections. And she helped us do the first financial projections for the business, which turned out to be 98% accurate. She's really good. And that worked out to be a good trade. If you can find other companies or to trade services with, or maybe some of your customers, that may be a very cost-effective use of your time. So when do you have to hire your first full-time employee that's maybe forced on you by your accountant, telling you the IRS is going to audit you unless you do it? That happened to us with a couple of people where they're like, yeah, it's time to do it, and they were right. There's also a quality and reliability aspect to this. There are some positions you cannot find a part-time person for that's going to be really good. And that's probably a blanket statement, maybe not completely true, but I think there are certain positions where we would put out resumes for part-time people, and we would just not get any good applicants at any price. And then we would change it to full-time, and we'd suddenly get good people. There are people who are already gainfully employed who are not going to leave their job for a part-time contracting position when they already have full-time employment. The qualities you want to look for, and this is important, you need people who are scrappy, people who can make do with limited resources, people who can get things done, people who do not need direction and supervision. You need people who are a little bit like you. What you don't want are people who need a lot of direction, who want to be a cog in a giant system. They are much better suited for a large corporation. People who need large teams to support them for anything they do. If someone came from a huge company where they had a different person to, they're dealing with 12 people that would deliver bits of information or stuff to them, that may not be a good fit. You need somebody who maybe worked at a startup or has never worked at a startup, and you can kind of ascertain that they will get things done, they will be resourceful on their own. They'll just do things and ask for permission later. If you need a graphic made, they'll just go on Fiverr, borrow your credit card, buy it, and come back and tell you it happened. Those are great employees. Try to find people like that. So culture. We'll talk a little bit about the different types of culture that you can kind of choose for what type of organization you have. And you can have any kind of culture you want. And what the culture you create at the beginning, and this is very important, will really dictate the kind of talent that you can attract and retain later on. And it's really tough to change the culture later. This is one thing that you kind of have to plan and think about consciously when you have the first couple employees. You need to hire employees and you need to promote employees who embody this culture and demonstrate the culture to other staff. If you have this really work hard, play hard mentality, don't hire somebody who wants to come in at 8 and leave at 5 on the dot and take an hour lunch and never answers the email on weekends and never returns phone calls, just goes straight to voicemail weekend. That's not the type of fit that you want in your culture at the beginning. That may be a perfectly good person to hire later, But for that initial core people, you need people, and you need to promote people who really embody the culture. So our culture, the way we've set it up, it's, as you guessed, very low supervision. And this requires diligence because you will have slackers who take advantage of this. And eventually you need to identify them. And having staff that's on board with this and wants the same culture with you can really help in helping you, can really help to hire the right people in the first place and to keep and retain and promote the right people who fit with this. For customers, we really prioritize customer service, even for rude customers that sometimes don't deserve it. Sometimes we've had customers that have been very rude or mean to staff, and we've always kind of taken the approach to be pleasant, be calm, listen to their problems. Sometimes we've made a mistake, and they have every right to be upset. Sometimes they have no right to be upset, and they'll email me later and apologize for yelling at me earlier in the day. That's happened a couple of times. And it doesn't happen often, but when it does, be kind to your customers that aren't kind to you. And that's kind of what if I can draw on the pay it forward aspect to that. Really, I talked about a little bit planning for the future. The culture you instill now will affect what you have later, and it's really difficult to change that. And you need to lead by example as much as possible. If you want to have an environment where people have flexible hours, as we do, people come in at whatever time they want and they leave at whatever time they want. You can't, if you want that for yourself, you can't force your staff to have different rules. It'll lead to resentment, and people won't really respect you as a leader. If you want to take lots of vacation, you need to figure out a way for your staff to do it too. We have a concept of working sabbaticals, where, because I would find myself, I would go on vacation, I can never really unplug. I always take the laptop with me, but I would do at least an hour or two of work per day, sometimes a little more, but usually at least an hour. And it's amazing how effective you can be, even if you're gone for 2 weeks, if you check in for a half hour, an hour a day, just to keep the critical things moving, because there's nothing worse than just needing permission or approval from somebody, and they're just gone for 2 weeks, and it just stops. But usually there are things that can be passed on, rerouted to other people, and you can really keep almost 80% or 90% of the spice moving through the system if you just check in a little bit on vacations. So we have working sabbaticals, where if somebody's been with us for a year, they can go live wherever they want in the world for a month and work 60, 70% of the time. And so you can just move to the south of Spain for a month and live in a hostel or rent a house and just work 2 or 3 days a week, take vacation for the other ones, and you're living in Spain for a month, which is part of the reason I started a company in the first place. I wanted freedom of travel, I wanted freedom of movement, I wanted freedom of time. I wanted to try to make some money too, but those things were more important to me. And I try to pass off as many of those benefits that I wanted for myself to my staff. I would encourage you guys to do the same. Don't have this two-tiered system of management and employees. I don't think that will work well in the long run. So one of the larger influences on me was Ricardo Semler, who founded a company called Semco in Brazil that my staff is really tired of hearing about, probably. But he created a very transparent company, which is something we've tried to mimic. When we make decisions, the worst decisions I've ever made have been made in a vacuum, where I just thought about it and I came out and made an announcement, and there was immediate revolt. And everybody's like, "This is a terrible idea." And people were fighting me on it, and sometimes they were right. But we still made bad decisions as a group, but there have been a lot fewer. And I still made great decisions individually, but the only really bad decisions we ever made as a company were when I made them in isolation without talking to your staff. Your staff is smarter than you think. And you really need to trust them because they have, especially as you grow, they'll have a lot more exposure to your customers and to other staff and what the real problems are in the company that don't always make it up to you. And you really need to engage their feedback and really welcome it, even if it's insulting or not presented in the most diplomatic way, which can happen. I get feedback from staff that sometimes borders on insubordination at other companies, and I always am thankful for it and I encourage it, because I want it to keep coming. I don't want to be running blind with people telling me everything's going great as I drive off a cliff. And you need to avoid that too. Ricardo Semler wrote 2 books on kind of the dramatic changes that they instituted at Semco. And he took the company from like 2 million to I think like 400 million. And his first decision on the job, the first week, was to fire the entire executive staff. And he went through you should really read the book. I'll just give you one takeaway. When you work at Semco your first day, they ask you, "Great, welcome to Semco, you're hired. so how much are we going to pay you? And you're like, what do you mean? You're like, well, you get to pick your own salary here at Semco. And you're like, oh, about $1 million. And they're like, that's a great salary. By the way, all salaries are transparent to the entire company, so the janitor can look up your salary, figure out how much you make. And there's a meeting, by the way, in 3 weeks where we're doing budget planning, and your staff and your colleagues from other departments are going to get to vote on budgets. You're going to stick out that $1 million salary. Most of the people in your role make 110, 120, 130. There's one guy who pulled off 180, but he's really good. Maybe you're better than him, but it's a little, you're taking a bit of a risk here. And if they don't like it, your own staff can fire you. And you read about these changes they've instituted, and you're like, this is never going to work. And then profits go up, revenue goes up, happiness goes up. Great business leader and 2 great books. Tim Ferriss's 4-Hour Workweek. How many people have read that? So it's a bit. It's not. I wouldn't call it. It's not. That's too strong of a word. It's a bit misleading and overpromising. But I still would recommend it. It's a great resource for little hacks to improve your productivity. I still am on that diet that he recommended to this day. Although it's getting more and more difficult. But there, especially kind of his concept of having a lot more freedom of time and how work gets done, and opening up your eyes to that. Don't force people to come in at 9 to 5. Most people here probably don't feel like they work best 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. And it's always that way. It's not usually that way. Give your staff the same flexibility that you feel you need for yourself. And like you can pull the best and worst experiences from previous places of employment. I talked a little bit about getting feedback from my team. We try to be as transparent as possible. Our conference room doesn't even have like a ceiling to it, so you can hear everything. It just kind of dims the noise a bit. If people want to come into a meeting, they're just welcome to walk on in, even if it has nothing to do with them. If you feel like you can contribute to a meeting, just walk on in. I technically have veto power, but I can't remember the last time I've exercised it. I really try to have buy-in from staff. And if most of your staff want something, and you are on the opposite side, you may need to reevaluate or bounce this off your peers or other companies or other founders or mentors you have. They may be right, and sometimes they are. A couple of software tools that we use that I found to be really useful. We built our own CMS platform that we use for our clients. Teamwork project management is one of the better decisions we had. We hired a new project manager at one point that was just considering changing it, and there was almost a revolt. People were sending me emails like, we're not really changing this, are we? If you guys are using Basecamp or anything else for project management, I'd highly recommend you consider Teamwork. It's a fantastic product, and they're constantly iterating. We use Google Apps for everything you'd expect. We use Slack for internal communications. Who here is already using a real-time chat platform like Slack? Or, yeah, it should be everybody. It really cuts down on email. Little emails where you're like, okay, thanks. Those are just gone. They just don't happen anymore. They don't clog up your inbox. It really has made us more efficient. There are now some free alternatives like River or River or however you say that you may want to consider too. But you should really consider some kind of real-time chat platform that everybody lives on all day. It makes things a lot more efficient and useful. We use FluentStream, a local company, for VoIP, and ChargeOver for billing. That's an important one because we failed 3 or 4 times to have a billing system that worked. And I cannot tell you how important it is to actually be able to bill your clients the right amount at the right time and actually collect their money. It took us so long to get that right, where we would have, it's very awkward to call up a client and say, hey, we haven't billed you for the last 6 months. Can you send us $4,000? And they're like, what? That never goes over well. You really need to get billing in order and accounting in order as well. We use Xero for that. We might switch to QuickBooks. So I'm not sure if I would endorse it. But you need to get those early problems that will become huge problems in order before you scale. And billing and accounting are 2 that I would firmly put in that category. So some of my biggest failures here. A couple of hiring decisions, also some of my biggest successes. It's probably going to be the case for anybody. A couple failed partnership attempts. No, I'm not going to tell that story. But we had a couple, just a lot of failed partnerships attempts that were a waste of time and just never got off the ground. And we should have just stuck to what we were doing and tried to focus on our niche. As I said, don't try to expand too early beyond your niche if it's not appropriate. A lot of wasted feature development that could have been avoided with more feedback from customers, more feedback from staff. And it did take us 3 or 4 tries, depending on who's counting, to get a billing system in order that actually billed clients and worked. That's crucial. Some of the best moves, staying focused on dental and relentlessly keeping focused on the customer. Even when we had a project where my staff would come to me and be like, we're 20 hours over on this project. What do you want to do? We'll just do the project. Even if we're going to lose a little money. At least with our model, if we keep the customer for long enough, we'll eventually make that money back. And you don't have to have an awkward conversation that we're charging more. And in a situation where the customer may feel like it's your fault, that's going to be a really difficult sale. So always put your customers first, even if it means you're going to lose a little bit of money. We really believed in the platform we built and forced adoption to it. We turned down a lot of business who said, can you build me a site in WordPress or whatever the heck they were using at the time. And we forced everybody onto the same train. And the whole philosophy of this was we now have this multi-tenant software where if Google makes technical changes, says everybody has to do things this way if you want your site to appear highly in Google, or there are new features that come out that everybody wants, or there are new tricks you need to do to make your site responsive and work on all sorts of mobile devices, or those little Geordie LaForge Google Glass things. We can just roll those features out on our platform, and everybody gets it like that. All customers, past, future, and present. Don't create a system where you're going to, if we had taken all the business that ever came to us and done things exactly the way our customers wanted, we would have this disparate collection of websites all over the place where passwords are changing. We no longer have access to stuff. The overhead and cost of maintaining those sites would be a nightmare. Instead, it's extremely profitable, and we just pour the money back into R&D of the platform and keep improving our platform. Try to find a situation where you can do the same thing, where you don't have to jump through hoops to service new customers. Make them come to you. And you can be a little dogmatic about that to an extent. And then, of course, finally admitting that we needed to build a hybrid SaaS agency model. I was a programmer. I wanted to build a SaaS company. But that's not what the market wanted. The market wanted agency services on top of the SaaS platform. And it took a while for me to admit that, my original theory was wrong. But it was. And you may come across a similar situation like that. And you don't have to give in immediately, but when you start to hear the same thing from multiple people, you need to really sit down and think about it, because it may be time for a pivot or a deviation. And of course, we had a few great hires that have really become powerful forces in our company and great leaders. And also, this is one kind of, not key requirement, but important note about bootstrapping. I think it's a lot easier to bootstrap a B2B company than if you're going consumer focused. Consumers don't have the budgets that businesses have, and they're a lot more leery to make a decision unless you have some kind of recognizable brand. And I mean, I don't know what we would have done with consumers, but dentists, especially the initial sales, I could sell them on the story of the company. They're a dentist in my family. We had experience in this industry. We're going to do a good job. You talk to one of our references. It's a lot easier to get that initial revenue and new customers if you're dealing with businesses. So a couple stats and charts for you guys. Today we have about 400 clients in 3 countries, the US, Canada, and a small footprint in Ireland that kind of happened by random chance. We have a very diversified revenue stream. I think our largest single client is maybe 1-2% of our revenue. And the next closest one is probably 0.25%. So we're well positioned to take a punch if the economy goes to hell. It will. We have already kind of passed escape velocity, which is something, again, that I was always worried about. That, is the company going to make it? Are we going to fail? But after a while, you look back and you're like, oh, we probably did that 6 months ago. And it's a really rewarding and great feeling and a relief that I hope everybody here gets to experience at some point, to realize that the company could contract. We could have another recession and have to contract a little bit or lose some customers and go a little lean for a bit. But we're not going to go bankrupt at this point. We already have enough of a base, and we have enough good customers that are dentists that not all of them are going to go bankrupt. We'll be fine. And we continue to have exponential revenue growth and expansion. And our software platform has matured considerably to the point where we can start to look at some of those other industries that could do it yourself. And the software is almost a usable product by self-directed customers. Still a little bit ways to go, but it's made such great strides, and our engineering team has done a fantastic job. And that's come from forcing clients to use our platform, which has given us the money to invest $10K or so every month into the software platform to build new stuff. This is our revenue per quarter. I went back as far as I had accurate accounting data. Again, get accurate accounting data as early as possible, or you're going to get derisive and insulting looks from every accountant you have to deal with, even to this day. This is today, and this is, I think, an old chart. I think we're another plus 20 towards the end of the month, and we still have a couple days left. So revenue has been really outstanding. It does get harder to double the bigger you get. This is year-over-year revenue growth per quarter, so it's obviously a lot easier to double when it's nothing. But the farther you go, it's still strong. We're still 150% revenue growth over last year, even today. Our headcount in 2012, we had 5 contractors. Prior to that, it was just me and Alex and my wife. And today, we have 11 full-time employees and 15 contractors and an office in Lodo. The challenges we have ahead, and maybe some of you in the room can help us with this. Maybe you'll have a great idea for me, and hopefully I'll listen. That's a personal failing. But better financial modeling and planning, this has probably been on my to-do list every single year I've ever had it, but it always needs improvement. Improving our own marketing. We're surprisingly good, well, maybe unsurprisingly good at marketing dentists to the general population, but we're very bad at marketing ourselves to dentists. Besides the online forums that we've used for lead generation, which has paid for itself so many times over and is the gift that keeps on giving, we've tried a couple of experiments with marketing and come up short. We're trying to hire a marketing person or work with a company that help us market to dentists. It's a totally different animal. International expansion, we're working on some deals in Australia and elsewhere to try to expand our brand and our services to other regions that sorely need it. And expanding our offering to include more value-added services that our clients have asked for. There's always going to be HR and staff issues. That's never a fun part of being in business, but you have to deal with them. People want certain benefits or want policies changed, and you got to weigh it, and then nobody's happy. It's just something you have to deal with as a business owner, and try to get involvement of your staff as quickly as possible. And we might change our name. This comes up every month. Everybody's like, that's a spammy name. It's a stupid name. Our sales guy's the only one who likes it because it has a good reputation. But other than that, that comes up. Maybe we'll change our name at some point. Good, it clocked in exactly an hour. That's about it for what I wanted to share with you guys. I'm happy to take questions. I think we have the room for another half hour if anybody has any questions of any kind.